Welcome to Breaking Tropes, and today we'll be looking at the work of Naoki Urasawa, a man I like to call the master of mystery. So I kind of want this to be a series where we just kind of talk about some of the different works that a mangaka has done, because to be quite honest, I don't look at manga and anime the same way I look at American media. A lot of times when I watch an American movie or read an American novel, I will notice the authors and I'll be like, oh, so-and-so did this, this, and this. Not quite the same with with manga and anime, for me at least. So a lot of the times it's always a surprise when I hear that a mangaka did like this other manga, and it's like, oh, that makes sense, it's kind of similar. So I at least want this series to cover the most popular works a person has done. So let's get started. So first thing I want to do is kind of go over some of the common themes that I've seen throughout Urasawa's work. And the first one isn't really a common theme, it's more of a comparison. And that's, I really saw a strong resemblance to Stephen King. So the way Stephen King tells a story, if you've read a Stephen King novel, obviously they have similar themes like horror, mystery, supernatural, those types of things.
He discovered electricity and used it to torture small animals and Green Mountain men. And that key he tied to the end of a kite, it opened the gates of hell!
But it's not just that, it's also the way that the story's being told, and specifically the way characters are introduced. And we see that especially in 20th Century Boys. But we'll move on to the next one. All of Urasawa's works that I've read have a centralized villain. And how is this different than any other medium? Let's say like superheroes, they all have villains, right? I would say the main difference is that the story is purely focused on that villain. So everything that goes on, or at least most things that go on in the story, all go back to this villain. The story really moves off the villain more so than even the main character, right? So that's one thing to notice throughout all of these works. Urasawa also has a lot of detours in his work. So what do I mean by detours? I mean, you're paying attention to a certain character. It might be the main character, it might be the villain, and we follow him for a certain amount of time. Then we switch perspectives to another character, and another character, and another character, and a side character. And so this happens so much throughout Urasawa's work that you just kind of grow to accept that these detours are coming, and a lot of the times they're pretty good. Oh, and these detours also come in the form of flashbacks. A lot of flashbacks, especially in 20th Century Boys. The last commonality I noticed here was really flushed out characters and strong character development throughout all of these works. And that's probably one of the main reasons why I enjoyed them. Urasawa takes the time to build up characters. Sometimes they have very detailed backstories. Sometimes they're just personified very well. But he does a great job of making you care about characters and establishing so many characters. And for the most part, they don't bog the story down at all. Also, before we get started, through each one of these works, I have a spoiler section where I kind of go in depth in some of the plot points. So you could just skip through those if you kind of want to just get like a broad idea of each work. So let's jump right into Monster, the 74 episode anime. I thought that Monster was the most enjoyable out of all three works. Again, I watched the anime, I have not read the manga, but I heard there are like very minimal differences between the two. And I thought it was interesting to note that Urasawa doesn't have a lot of anime adaptations of his work. The other two, this is the third one actually, the other two being Yawara and Master Keaton, which were both really older ones, like in the late 80s, early 90s. And this was actually his last anime adaptation, although 20th Century Boys does have a live action. And also I think it speaks to his work that a lot of studios didn't want to pick up his work because it's very dialogue heavy, very not a lot of action, and maybe that scared a lot of people off. But I personally think that some of these mangas would make great animes. We already know Monster is a great anime. But back to the point. Now, why did I like Monster the best? Well, I guess it comes down to Johann Liebert being the best villain out of all three works. And this is important because when you center your story around a great evil, a great mystery, a great villain, then you kind of have to nail that villain. And Monster nails that villain. Now, the main character of Monster is Kenzo Tenma, who's, by himself is a great character. But the force behind everything is Johann Liebert. I really enjoyed the personification and mystery behind Johann. So much of the fun in Monster for me was learning about his past and really pondering the idea of what made him so evil. And speaking of evil, Monster really has some of the most in-depth ideas about evil that I've seen in a medium and how it corrupts the human psyche. You know those children's books? Yeah, those still kind of give me the creeps. You know they're evil, but you can't really pinpoint the exact reason why, or why they have such a profound effect on the kids in this story. Now, another Urasawa guideline that we stated earlier is introducing new characters who seemingly have no connection to the plot, swiftly making them interesting and connecting them back to the overall narrative. I'll touch on this a bit more when we get to 20th Century Boys, but I'd say Monster does this better than its counterparts. It's kind of cool how Urasawa creates so many detailed characters and kind of like places them throughout the story, and so how some of these character arcs vary in length. Some of them are long, some of them are short, but then he always has a way of swiftly tying them back to the overall narrative without sacrificing pace or frustrating the audience. This is a talent in my opinion, and this is kind of the reason why I say he's a lot like Stephen King. I remember feeling frustrated when the story would crescendo, we'd get to like a peak, only to watch the next episode be following a different character. I felt this was kind of annoying, especially when it was like a really new character, but my patience was later rewarded because that new character and their story would be tied back to the original narrative or one of the original characters. Also, these detours do a good job of building on the suspense that is sustained throughout Monster. I'm just going to say a great example of this is Martin, the hitman turned bodyguard. Just an awesome character, and his character arc is amazing.
Oh, I can't tell. It's a spoiler alert. Sorry.
So let's jump right into the spoiler section here so you can skip over this if you don't want to know anything about the plot. So I really have two minor gripes about Monster, and these are very minor. One is that I kind of felt teased throughout the anime. Some things really never got answered, like why Johan deleted part of the tape recording. It's like they were looking for that tape recording for so long, and then they get their hands on it, listen to it, and Johan takes it back, and then he deletes part of it. And it's like, what part of it did he delete, and why was that so important? That's just one example. Part of me thinks Urasawa plants too many seeds to build suspense, but kind of forgets that they're there or just doesn't have an explanation for them. I wasn't too mad about this with Monster because it was a fun ride. I think some of the stuff was purposely left up for interpretation, and that's because Johan is a whimsical character, so it kind of makes sense to make his intentions a little bit vague. So my other minor issues with the ending, Tenma ends up operating on Johan again and saving his life, which I felt was kind of dumb. Yes, I know, it fits with the character because Tenma isn't the type of person to kill somebody, but I really feel like it lacked intention. What exactly did Tenma hope to accomplish this time around? Johan is out in the world again, and there is no reason to believe he won't kill, destroy, and manipulate again. I don't think killing an evil person makes you evil or a monster, so why keep him alive? Oh, just to prove that he's wrong and that not everyone is corruptible. Yeah, okay, but people are going to die again, so... Man, I gotta say that whole ending scene was a bit weird, but that scene with the window opening and you can obviously tell that Johan has left, that was pretty good. Okay, 20th Century Boys and 21st Century Boys. You have 22 volumes, 249 chapters, and then an additional 16 chapters with 21st Century Boys, which is pretty much an add-on on the original story. Because for some reason, 249 chapters wasn't enough for Urasawa to finish the narrative, so he kind of had to add on an additional 16 chapters. Yep. So overall, I thought that the series was fun and very interesting, but it had significant flaws, especially towards the end of the narrative. And there definitely is crazy hype with this one. People will say that this is the greatest manga of all time. People will say that this is Urasawa's best work. And I gotta say, I disagree with that. So this manga is one giant mystery with a little suspense and quite a bit of dialogue. And if you're following the Urasawa guidelines, you would know that it's one long mystery centered around a villain. And that villain is Friend, who, like Johan and Monster, is the driving force behind 20th Century Boys. So let's start off with the pros first. Just like Monster, we have a lot of interesting characters that have a lot of depth. Urasawa again uses detours to introduce side characters and link them to the main plot. I'll give an example of this when we get to the spoiler section. Characters like Kenji, Ocho, and Donkey were standouts for me, but then you have side characters like Inspector Chu and later his grandson. I would be shocked if at least one of these characters didn't resonate with you in some way, and that's kind of how Urasawa's work is. I would think that if you like Urasawa, you can pick out one of these characters and say, man, that character is really cool. During the first part of the manga, I really enjoyed the flashbacks. I think they did a great job of showing the parallels of childhood and adulthood. The audience gets to see the contrast of how characters have changed. Urasawa also conveys how life can sometimes make us forget who we are and what we dream of. Everything that goes on in the past directly relates to the mystery unraveling in the future. Watching these two stories play out and seeing the Book of Prophecies come to life was interesting. It reminded me a lot of Stephen King's It, which is also a story being told across a very wide time range and revolves around a great evil. There actually is a Stephen King reference in 20th Century Boys, which confirmed my suspicion that there was some kind of influence between the two. It was kind of like an aha moment for me. So moving on to the cons here, I really felt like this manga was just too long. I think one good time skip can do wonders for a story. You have the chance to introduce new characters and create a new world. And the first time skip accomplished this, but adding another one did nothing for the story. My interest level dropped significantly, and I really didn't feel like this mystery needed to be 249 chapters, plus an additional 16 chapters in 21st Century Boys. After the second time skip, the story just felt forced, and the allure of Friend and the kind of like the mystery behind him, the Book of Prophecies, became a watered down shell of itself. And so we'll get into that a little bit with the spoiler talk here. So if you don't want anything ruined, you can go ahead and skip to Pluto. So right after the first time skip, Kyoko is a great example of the right way to introduce a new character. At first, she's Kana's classmate who kind of is a little bit impulsive. She picks the Bloody New Year's Eve event for a class project, and this kind of leads to her being suspected by her teacher, who sends her off to some kind of camp to be brainwashed. So through this new character in part 2, a lot of things are revealed about how Friend is controlling the world, and her arc eventually leads her to the original cast, which we don't know anything about at this time because, right, this is post-time skip. So kind of an example of a fun detour and a character that became interesting. And so getting into my cons with the spoilers here. So the story had 2 clear turning points for me. One was Fukube's death, which kind of was like a what the f moment for me. So you set this guy up to be this menacing villain, and he just dies like that. Just like out of the blue. And then we learn there's another friend, and it's at this point where I felt like Urasawa was trying to subvert my expectations. Oh, you thought you knew who Friend was? Ooh, yeah. Let me kill him off to expand the story. It felt cheap and whimsical. And this leads in nicely to my second turning point and shows why 20th Century Boys can be so frustrating at times. So let's start with Friend saving the Pope in chapter 169. This was a huge turning point in the story, and then we see Kenji appear in chapter 170, and it's like, oh, the main character is back. Yes, where has he been? Nope, not getting that answer right now. Flashback to the 70s, and this is actually one of my favorite flashbacks of the manga because it's about Fukube and the original Friend. And it ties up a lot of those loose ends, and we finally get to peek inside the mind of Fukube and Friend, who ends up being an obsessed, self-absorbed, perhaps mentally ill boy. Just when you think there would be more explanation of this grandiose villain, and we're getting that, 6 chapters into that flashback, we flash forward into the 3rd year of Friend. The focus switches to the present-day Friend, who is viewing his memories from the past using some kind of VR reading system that can apparently see the future as well. Okay, I guess I can get into this. What's going on? Nope, then the focus changes to completely new characters in this new world. Okay, so we're 177 chapters in at this point. This is where a strength becomes a weakness. I would have been happy to see what Kenji was doing, or how Friend saving the Pope changed the world right then and there. I would have been very happy to see a fleshed out Fukube, and maybe even a complete history of how he became Friend. Maybe him seducing Kiriko, anything else of relevant. I would have been happy to see details about present-day Friend and what technology he was using at that time. Well, instead we get none of that at all. This is not feasible storytelling in my opinion. This is ADHD storytelling. My interest in the story really decayed at this point, and the ending was a sloppy mess. Then you have to read an additional 16 chapters to understand that sloppy mess. And those 16 chapters are also kind of a sloppy mess as well. So I've been singing Urasawa's praises up until now, and I know I'm being kind of hard on 20th Century Boys, but that's because it really had a lot going for it. I still enjoyed a majority of it, probably like maybe those first 169 chapters. but it's not the best manga of all time. It clearly is not the best manga of all time. I don't see how anyone could say that it is. I don't even think it's the best of his work. It's certainly not the best structured. I don't think it really has the best characters or the best villain. So I'm not quite sure the kind of sensationalized lore with this one. It is a good story though, so I don't want to end on a sour note here. It is good. So moving on to Pluto, we have 65 acts or chapters, and I don't have as much to say about this one. It takes place in the world of Astro Boy and is a reinterpretation of the Astro Boy chapter entitled The Greatest Robot on Earth. I definitely feel like you would have much more appreciation for this one if you're an Astro Boy fan or have at least read that chapter, but I still enjoyed it regardless, and you don't need to know jack shit about Astro Boy. Apparently the creator of Astro Boy's son, Makoto Tezuka, helped Urasawa out and gave him his blessings to do his own thing with the characters and story. So again, Pluto is more mystery as the characters are trying to find out who is killing the 7 greatest robots on Earth. We have another centralized villain in Pluto, but not as many characters and detours as the other 2 works. Before we move on to pros and cons, how about we exchange memory chips? Oh, what's that? You're afraid I'll take over your body and make you subscribe? Well, you should do that anyways. And if you did, you wouldn't have to worry about me doing that now, would you? It's okay, I'll give you time to think about it. From a narrative standpoint, this is probably the most solid and cohesive work out of all 3, but it's also the least interesting. Now don't get that twisted, we're talking about Urasawa here, so that's not really a bad thing. The mystery behind Pluto never got stale, and the conclusion came at the right time. Pluto doesn't overstay its welcome, it's only 65 chapters. Again, Urasawa nails mystery, the suspense, and characters. All these elements are maintained throughout the story. Thematically, we have strong themes of humanity, evil, identity, and war, among others. So similar themes that Urasawa uses. Dope character design here. Not sure if this is Urasawa or if it's Astro Boy, but it's spot on. Well, you can kind of tell which is which from the characters. I mean, you look at Gishik, he looks not like an Astro Boy character. But then there are some other ones that are pretty obvious. And there's not too many flaws that stuck out to me with this one. For me, this was a manga that I really wouldn't rave about though to anyone. It's solid, it's good, it's got good plot, good characters, and an ending that is pretty decent. I would say it's not as grandiose as 20th Century Boys and Monster, so that's probably what hurt it in my eyes. But it's a bit refreshing to see Urasawa tell a shorter narrative, getting into specific plot points so you could skip to the end if you don't want anything spoiled. So I really like the concept of an AI being made up of 6 billion personalities and being unable to function, then a personality being introduced with intense hatred, allowing that robot to function. I really think you could relate this to how society is often unified with intense polarizing emotions. So often hate and negativity is what elicits a response in us. This is something unfortunate about the human condition. However, we see Adam overcome these emotions with understanding, which is a pretty sweet parallel. You know, we have Adam who overcomes his hatred, then we have a Bula who kind of succumbs to it. And not the original Bula, the robot referred to as a Bula, and then not Goji either, right? Because Goji was the other personality. And then not Pluto, but then there's also Sahad, who is actually a good guy. So the ending was good, but it was a little confusing. We have Abula, then the robot AI referred to as Abula, having 2 personalities, and those 2 personalities creating 2 different robots, one of them being Pluto, the namesake of the series. This is a little hard to wrap my head around at first. Also, the teddy bear confused me a bit, but it turned out to be a supercomputer. Not gonna lie, this one was a little bit weird. So here's how I would rank Urasawa's work. No surprise here based on what I said in this video. How would you rank Urasawa's work? I want you to do that in the comment section below, and feel free to include any works that I haven't covered in this video. So far, Urasawa's work is really good in my opinion. I love the idea of a centralized villain. I love villains, so who doesn't love villains? And I do plan on reading Billy Bat. It sounds like it has a lot of the same Urasawa guidelines. What do you guys think? Should I read Billy Bat? Have you read Billy Bat? What are your thoughts? And let me know if you want me to cover any other manga. This was pretty fun, so I'd be happy to do it again. In the meantime, subscribe, like, and exchange memory chips with me.
NANI?!
Next video hint. An apple.
Oh, that's what I'm doing next? Shit. That's not that bad.